Guys, it's Dave from the Australian Off-Road Academy. You've seen me in a few of the episodes with the team from the Offroad Adventure Show. So my very first visit to the Watagans, we've been having so much fun. Scotty Lawrence from TJM he was really taking to the low range driving we were throwing at him. And look folks, we were doing some tough tracks. You know, there was already on the day before that rollover, we'd had to do a pretty complicated and pretty full-on recovery that involved 2 winches at once. So, you know, we were in the thick of it, and ultimately there we've got to a track we'd already driven through some pretty gnarly terrain to get to right there, and it was just a slight mismatch of what our intentions were to where our wheels actually ended up. You know, we plotted a course up and we didn't quite get it. Now, that's not my first rollover, it's probably my slowest rollover. That was quite something. But I think most people who've been off-roading for long enough have either had a tip or had a little rest against a tree, or they've gone close and they've driven through an obstacle and sort of looked across at their partner and it's like, oh, we were nearly there. So I think a reality of exploring and pushing your own limit is that, you know, one day you may just bite off a little bit more than you can chew, or perhaps just as we did, we were 1 wheel width further across than what we planned to be. So dealing for or planning for the possibility this sort of thing could happen is important. Now, something that will jump out at you the very first time you do this, when you're out, you've made sure everyone's okay, you'll realise your recovery gear is hard to get at, and that's actually a reality. So as we often say, the very best recovery tool you can have with you is a good mate in a well-prepared car. And we were lucky enough to have Rick right there able to do that for us. So before we got out of the car, we put the handbrake on because we knew we were going to have to put that car back on its wheels eventually. So handbrake on. Then once we're out, we took a stock take of what we had. So we knew what resources we had in Rick's car. And then with that equipment, we could come up with a plan. So it really was tools down for probably half an hour. We probably sat there and came up with our best strategy. And then we organised for Rick to go ahead and turn around. And then it really was a massive amount of teamwork. Everyone in that role, all 5 or 6 of us that were there that day, were really active in that recovery operation because everyone could see something that someone else couldn't, and we were communicating really quite well. It was important though that one person take the lead, and that was in this case the person with the best view, and that person was Rick. And then the rest of us could offer little bits of information that we could see. Before we attached Rick's winch to the chassis of the Hilux, we did run that winch cable from the Ranger out and ahead and made that taut so that if the vehicle did move backwards a little bit, we could keep all of our team safe. The car could only come back onto the winch. So in this particular case, you know, our first course of action was to get the vehicle back onto its tyres. You know, you could have rushed into that situation and tried to winch it forwards or backwards or something else, but the best plan was to get it back onto all 4 wheels because it was actually going to sit fairly stably there, and we were able to get it back onto nice stable ground where we could then properly make an assessment and do things like take the roof rack or take the rooftop tent off so it didn't cause us more problems. So once the vehicle's back on its wheels and it's stable, okay, so when I say stable here, the car's not going to move and hurt anyone. So we had the vehicle in a position where we could comfortably work around it. It was time to pop the bonnet and to see what else was going on inside. We had started the engine and we were getting a low oil pressure warning. So we had to trace what was going on there. So we were very, very careful just to leave the engine running only at idle. What we did need to look for though are some of the obvious things. We needed to make sure that there'd been no massive loss of oil. We were checking things like the breathers to make sure the diffs hadn't somehow emptied themselves during the time it was on its side. We did notice actually a little bit of a leak of battery acid, so that was something we also had to deal with. Once we did get the car out of the way, we did have to go back and pick up all the stuff that had fallen out in the process of getting back in the car. We went through, made sure there was nothing there that was super important, picked up all our rubbish, and we were back on flat ground where we had changed the tyre. Even though everything looked good at the time, it was still really important to get that car checked out properly. You can only see so much from the ground. You do need to make a plan either in the next town you're visiting, or perhaps if you're not too far from home, then, you know, when you get home that night, to organise to get it up on a hoist and get a professional to look it over properly, because there may be an engine mount, there may be some other issue in there that's just not visible to you when you're out on the tracks. So you might have found yourself in a situation something like ours, or you might have found yourself really close to it one day. If you've got a story or some pictures, we'd love to hear them, so post them in the comments below.